Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It is a great pleasure to me to introduce you, unfortunately, through the virtual presentation, our keynote speakers who unfortunately were not able to get through the COVID difficulties and some difficulties with visa. Professor Courtine and Professor Bloch, who still will present their keynote speech today. Professor Courtine is a great friend, and he is a unique background in mathematics and physics, brought him to medicine and discoveries of neuromodulation. He presently a professor of École Polytechnique Fédérale in Lausanne. He started, as I mentioned, in physics and mathematics. He completed his postdoctoral training with Reggie Edgerton, UCLA, and in 2004, I had pleasure to be a visiting professor at UCLA, where I worked with Grégoire and Reggie and Susie Harkim, and this was my first interaction with this team. And then he moved back to Switzerland, and right now he has most unique center with unique capacity to definitely do translational research from animals to large animals to humans. And today we will see interesting work, what he's doing. As well, we will hear from Professor Jocelyne Bloch, who is a neurosurgeon, functional neurosurgeon, who is also working in neuroscience, and her specialty is functional neurosurgery. She is working with neuromodulation in pain and epilepsy, and she's close collaborator of Grégoire. I have interesting also collaboration with lately Grégoire. My former MD PhD student just started his postdoctoral training with Grégoire, and that's why it's an absolutely exciting environment where his laboratory is. That's without any further ado. It is unfortunately recorded speech. That's why we don't have possibility to interact with Grégoire, but I hope you will be excited with his research, and in future collaboration, we will see how we can interact in future. And he also, as you know, supporter of our luncheon and supporter of this conference as well. Thank you. Please, can you start talk?
Good morning. You are all too familiar with the consequence of a spinal cord injury that interrupts the signal from the brain to the otherwise intact neuronal network below the injury that control various neurological functions. And you all very well know as well that epidural electrical stimulation is capable of reactivating this neuronal network after a spinal cord injury. And this is a research I was involved in almost 20 years ago now, when I was a postdoc in Reggie Edgerton's laboratory. This is the first time when we apply the electrical stimulation to the rat spinal cord. So this is a rat now with a complete transection of the spinal cord. Steam is on, it's working, turn off, the animal cannot walk. As soon as we turn it back on, the animal resumes walking. And after my postdoc, before transiting actually to human application, it was very important for me to understand the underlying scientific mechanism. So I started in my own laboratory in Zurich. And the first goal was really to understand what are the neural structure that we activate with epidural electrical stimulation. You know, my background is in physics, so I decided to start with biophysical model of the spinal cord. So we built this realistic biophysical model of the spinal cord. We could understand the field electrical induced by the stimulation. And then we coupled this finite element model, so it's called, with realistic anatomical model of the neurons, of the afferent fibers of all diameters. And then what we found with simulations is that the electrical stimulation does not penetrate the spinal cord. It flows on the side, depolarize afferent fibers, and of course, first, the afferent fibers of thick diameter because they are less resistant to current. And as you can see in this graph here, almost all the large diameter afferent fiber are depolarized before the depolarization of any other type of afferent fibers. Meaning that although this stimulation seems unspecific. The biophysical property of the nervous system turn this unspecific stimulation into the selective recruitment of large diameter afferent fibers. So this is what we like to call the spinal cord gateways to various neurological circuits. Well, at least that was a prediction of the model. And we really wanted to verify this prediction experimentally. So we generated various transgenic models, including this one, where we can visualize in 3D all the neurons with large diameter afferents. You see here the dorsal root ganglia. And what we perform is calcium imaging. So here you see a view over the dorsal root ganglia. You see the neurons that are activated when you apply electrical stimulation. And because it is performed in a transgenic animal, I can circle of this neuron which one are proprioceptive. And if I do so, you will see that more than 90% of the neuron activated by epidural electrical stimulation are actually proprioceptive. And to really, put the nail in the coffin, we're generating a transgenic animal that has no muscle proprioception. When you apply epidural electrical stimulation to this type of animal without muscle proprioception, you see that the animal is completely paralyzed. Whereas with the stimulation on, the wild type can walk perfectly. Really showing that this is a spinal cord gateway to neuronal network involved in the production of walking. Why is it important? Well, it is important because this understanding enables a transition from this kind of empirical continuous activation of the spinal cord to what we like to call biomimetic stimulation. The idea was really to target the dorsal roots, because this is a spinal cord gateway, with a timing and a spatial structure that coincide with the natural activation of the spinal cord during movement execution. And here came the problem. What is the natural activation of the spinal cord? And here came the work performed by Pruszewska and Lacquaniti in the past, who showed actually that you can reconstruct the activity of the spinal cord based on muscle activity. So here you see the sequence of electromyographic activity of the different leg muscle during walking. And we know theoretically more or less where these motor neuron activated these muscles are located. There is a clear rostrocaudal organization of the motor pools. And if you want to access this motor pool, you need to target the dorsal roots. So we can now represent the muscle activity directly onto the location of this motor pool. And what you see is this hotspot. We like to call them motor hotspots. They are linked to weight acceptance, propulsion, and swing. And by reproducing the activation of this hotspot, the idea that you will facilitate the natural activation of the spinal cord during walking. Does it work? Well, let me show you an example in rats. So this is a rat with a severe contusion of the spinal cord, completely paralyzed. We turn stimulation on continuously, as I showed you before. The animal walk. But it's as early as 1 week after the severe contusion. So the animal is very weak, he will collapse. This is where we turn on this biomimetic stimulation, spatiotemporal activation of the dorsal root that coincides with the natural activation of the muscle. Immediately, we rescue walking and increase the vigor of leg movement, really showing that this biomimetic stimulation is much more powerful to facilitate walking. That's the immediate effect of the stimulation. And then we thought, this was all based on Reggie Edgerton's work, that if we train with this strong activity, we would trigger activity-dependent plasticity. And although it has been done extensively on the restricted environment of the treadmill, we really wanted to apply the same concept of biomimetic, of activity and engagement in the training paradigm. So we moved away from the treadmill restricted environment and build this multi-directional robotic structure that basically supports the rat against the direction of gravity, provide a safe environment, but the rat this time really have to send a command from the brain to the spinal cord to initiate walking. And indeed, at the beginning, it completely fails. The rat steps perfectly on the treadmill, but the brain is not yet capable of sending a command to the lumbar spinal cord to initiate walking. But they improve over time, and after several months of training, a rat completely paralyzed, when the stimulation is turned on, is standing, and whenever they decide, they can sprint toward a delicious piece of Swiss chocolate that we position at the extremity of the runway. So this was, altogether maybe almost 10 years of work actually, combined with Los Angeles. And at this moment, I felt that we were ready to operate the transition to the clinic. But I was aware of two difficulties for this. First, we needed the technological environment to transit to human. And second, we needed clinical partner. The technical environment I founded at EPFL. This is a Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, kind of the MIT for Switzerland. And for the clinic, I found this fantastic person, Jocelyn Bloch, who is functional neurosurgeon. She really take care of all what is functional neurosurgery at the University Hospital here in Lausanne. So I knock at the door and I say, Jocelyn, are you ready to embrace this challenge to transit from the sophisticated environment of the rat laboratory to humans?
I remember this day, it was 2012.
Right.
So when I saw you first, you showed me all these rats walking, fascinating. And then he told me, do you take the challenge? Shall we have a clinical study soon? And I said, let's go.
Right.
We had a few challenges, of course. And the first one was, where would we train these people? And we needed a big room, a training room. And for that, we had the help of the president of the hospital. And we could inject all this technology in the room in order to make it happen. So the second challenge was also the implants. So you saw in the rats, you could not take exactly the same implants in the rat as in the humans. So we decided to work with a technology that was already available, CE approved, FDA approved. So we worked with Medtronic, the paddle leads that are normally used to treat pain, even if they were not really appropriate and done for this indication. We thought it was the best we could see at this moment. And we decided also, knowing now that Grégoire had a lot of ambitions with stimulation space-time and biomimetic, we needed to have a stimulator able to do that, but it did not exist at this time. So the best option was to select the IPG I use normally to put DBS leads in, the Activa RC. And there were then a complicated process in order to communicate with this IPG, to hack it and to reprogram the stimulation. And if you look at this chain of commands, you see that it's not something that is sustainable. It involves so many different waves. It's something we could do at EPFL and CHUV, but not something that you can export, and not everybody could benefit from such a complicated approach. Anyway, with a lot of energy, we did it. And so that was one of our first patients who got this system in. And you see that immediately after having been operated, he's able to walk with this space-time stimulation. When we stop stimulation, he stops walking. And when we put again stimulation on, he's able to walk again. Now, if you compare the biomimetic stimulation, the space-time stimulation, with the tonic stimulation, you see again, exactly as the same as we saw in the rats, a very important difference. So with the biomimetic stimulation, it's working much better.
Better and faster.
Yes. So then the third thing that we could see is that it's important to have the brain still functioning. So it's not that we switch on this robot and then he's walking without thinking, but you can, with your brain, still influence the height of your steps. See, here, if you ask David to step and to do a higher step, exaggerate a step, you'll see that he's able to do it by himself without any increase of the stimulation intensity.
Although these muscles are completely paralyzed without the stimulation.
So now, we saw with David and then the others that the challenge of the lead was a major challenge. Why? Because, as you know, spinal cords are different from one individual to the other. There is a huge variability, especially in the length, less in the width, fortunately. But this length makes, I think, that this approach was not the best. We would need a lot of leads, but for now, we needed to find the best compromise to be as selective as possible to be able to stimulate.
And target the dorsal roots, because currently they more target the dorsal column.
Yeah, yes. So what did we do? So we looked at different spines and we then modelized the spinal cords. We had an atlas, and from this we were able to have a modelization, an anatomical model and a finite model in which we could simulate stimulations at different areas, and we determined what was the best spot to be able to be selective. And this best spot was just lateral to the dorsal root entry zone, a little bit higher, and that was where we needed to be selective and where we needed to stimulate. So from this knowledge, we developed a new lead, the best compromise, let's say, lead, and that was Onwards did it with this knowledge. And this was our first lead, the go-to lead, which was exactly connected to the same IPG because we had not worked on that yet, but at least we would be able to obtain a best selectivity. So now how does it work in reality? Knowing that not every lead will be exactly good for each patient, we needed to be precise for each individual. So for that, we decided to work for each individual on the MRI. We performed an MRI, a CT scan to obtain an exact localization of each root. And we also performed a functional MRI to understand where the motor pools were located in the lumbar spinal cord. And from this information, we could know, I could know, they helped me to put the lead in. So I just had to put my lead in, and with all the information I got from Grégoire and the engineer team, so I was really helped to do the best surgery to be as precise as possible. So what happens then when the surgery is done? You think, oh, it must be super difficult to do this stimulation, but no, it was not that difficult because again, thanks to the engineer school and people who can handle interfaces pretty well, we made actually a tablet that allowed us to stimulate in space-time quite easily. It's a user-friendly tablet that makes it quite easy. So what can we do with these programs? So with these programs, we can do a good configuration for each different muscles. And that's the first phase, which is called the mapping phase. And for this first phase, we assess different muscles. So here we want to see how we can obtain a complete leg flexion in this patient. And you see that you can obtain it easily. You do it on both sides, different group of muscles. So that's the first phase. And then the second phase is to apply it in different conditions. So for example, you have here leg press. You see that it's possible to do in this complete paralyzed patient, full leg press. You then have the possibility to do other muscles. And what is very important also, this new lead is longer than the previous one. And with it, we were able to also reach the roots that were handling also the trunk muscles. So you see here, handling the trunk muscles, you can make it much easier when the patient can bend forwards and backwards, and he can also work on his abdominal muscles with the stimulation on. It's pretty impressive. He was very proud of his chocolate.
I'm jealous.
Yes, so that was really a plus, the specificity, selectivity, and also the possibility to work the trunk muscles.
So in this case, these are configuration to target a specific group of muscle. But of course, when you have a complex motor task, such as walking, you need to create sequences. So it's a bit more complicated. I can actually decorticate this for you during walking. So walking is a sequence of muscle activity, very special timing, as I showed before. And Jocelyn pointed out how now in each participant, we can know where are the motor pool underlying the activation of each of these muscles. So we know where we have to stimulate for the different activation of muscle. So if we look at the first phase of the movement, you need first to create this whole leg flexion, the activation of hip flexor, distal flexor muscles. So let's say iliopsoas and tibialis anterior, we know where they are located. So you have the electrode array, the CT scan, we know where is the lead. You can create your configuration to target this muscle. Then next phase is weight acceptance. So primarily engaging the vastus lateralis, quadriceps muscle group. So this is the L3 roots. So we're gonna configure this weight acceptance roots with low frequency because extensor muscle are more sensitive to low frequency as opposed to flexor muscle, which are more sensitive to high frequency. And then propulsion, which involve ankle extension, so all the tricep musculature, which we will target with the L5-S1 routes. And that's the sequence of muscle activity you have to create from the left side and the right side. And it seems complicated. Everybody thinks that it's going to be impossible to implement this complex spatiotemporal stimulation in the future, but it's not. Because we have built this software, as Justin pointed out, to configure the waveform, but also involving a time scheduler. So here you have the waveform to do flexion, extension of different muscle group, and you can fine tune the amplitude, the timing very easily, and then display the stimulation onto the muscle activity. So you know whether your timing is correct or not correct. So it's reasonably easy.
Yeah, and it can be done not only by engineers, but also physiotherapists can use it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, with this system, actually, it was possible to make our first patient who got the go-to lead. He was an ASIA A patient and able to properly walk a few days after the surgery. So look at this gait. So it's really nice to see him, but all the other candidates, because now we have implanted nine patients, 6 of them were incomplete. 3 of them were complete. The 3 complete were the one who got the new lead. All of them were able to walk. To walk, and what does it mean? When you walk, you can train. And training is super important. So they started training 4 times a week during many weeks, almost 6 months.
But not only during walking.
Yeah, not only during walking. Were able, and that's the nice thing about this space-time, we can adapt programs, and we can do, for example, cycling. So you have special programs to train the cycling, which is nice here, but also outside. They can use, then they have special bikes to cycle outside. And there is not only the cycling, but also the swimming, which can be done in water. So we have special programs for everything.
And because, it became like a new space of opportunity for PTs. Remember, they wanted to be able to use this different program easily in whichever rehabilitation environment. So we had to create an easy platform for them to follow their patient during the training. So we built this tablet, basically, where you can tune the stimulation, and also participant can trigger special sequences of stimulation with clickers or with wearable sensor attached to the feet, etc. So there are different ways to adjust the spatiotemporal stimulation. And it becomes very easy for physical therapists or for participants to use the stimulation in one rehabilitation environment for various activities, but also to take this technology outside the rehabilitation center in ecological settings. And what you will see here is a transition. This individual has a complete sensorimotor paralysis, and after a few months of training, he regained, weight-bearing stepping, I would say. Maybe he doesn't walk, but at least, he's able to progress. And this is not only for walking, as we emphasize, but for various activities. You see here some people doing full weight-bearing standing, boxing, walking in different environments, even challenging in the snow, using the bike, or this individual who have very poor trunk control, using the stimulation to do paddling on the lake.
But it was also very fascinating to see that with the training, a few things happened. This example is for me a good one. This patient was completely paralyzed left. And after 2 months of training, he started moving his knee. And after 5 months of training, it became even better. So he was able to recover after 7 years after an injury with no movement on the left. And so that's at the end of his training, he was able to walk between 2 parallel bars, which was, for me, pretty impressive.
Without the stimulation.
Yeah, So without stimulation, we assessed all the participants, and we saw that almost all of them gained motricity without stimulation. So you'll see that there is a correlation between the degree of severity of the lesion and the recovery, less when you are complete than when you are incomplete. But for all of them, it's worth it training even many years after an injury.
And this was a little bit of a surprise to us, this neurological recovery without the stimulation. So we modeled this recovery in animals to understand the underlying mechanism. So this is an animal here with this very severe contusion that lead to complete and permanent paralysis. There's about 8% of spared fibers in this case. We train the animal in the robot, the stimulation, as Justin showed. Then without the stimulation, you see a recovery of weight-bearing locomotion with balance in about 50 to 60% of the animals. So we could see this recovery in the absence of stimulation despite a very severe injury. And then we asked, how is it possible? All the nerve fibers reorganize in the circuit to enable this recovery. And you know, the field of spinal cord injury is notoriously known to be full of bias analysis, because you know, when you have to cut tissue, you know, you can select sections, and it's very difficult to have an unbiased assessment of neural connectivity. So we did not want to be confronted to this type of issues, and came, you know, the new era in neuroscience, whereby you can have completely transparent brain and spinal cord. This is one example here. And the imaging tools to scan this entire brain and spinal cord specimen without cutting it. They are called light sheet microscope. So we built one, we have a chamber that passes basically a sheet of light throughout the specimen, and you can visualize without cutting the corticospinal tract here in blue, the reticulospinal projection here in white, and the impact of the injury on this connectivity. And using this imaging technology, we have been able to understand that when you train the animal, this highly active state will promote the growth of new nerve projection. So there is no regeneration. You see indeed the corticospinal tract in blue that retracts, is very well known, but the reticulospinal fibers, because they are located all around the spinal cord, will be partly spared. And where we stimulate, this is where you will see this growth of new nerve connection, up to like 5-10-fold increase in the connectivity that suggests that this neuroplasticity will promote the recovery. And we really wanted to demonstrate this with precision tool. So we use chemogenetics and optogenetics. So optogenetics allows us to activate the motor cortex, while the chemogenetics allow us to inactivate reticulospinal neurons selectively, but only for a short period of time. So we can test the contribution of this system. So the mouse have the severe contusion, we stimulate the spinal cord standing, and when we activate the motor cortex, immediately you see that the animal starts walking, and it will walk as long as we stimulate the motor cortex. Turn it off, and then she stops walking. So you need to sustain descending drive. Now we inactivate just glutamatergic neuron in the reticular formation, the ventral gigantocellular nucleus precisely. And now when we stimulate the motor cortex, nothing happens. We see the movement of the forelimb. So there is an activation, but no motor command reaching the lumbar spinal cord to initiate walking, really showing that the reorganization of this pathway, the cortex from the brainstem to the lumbar spinal cord, was key to enable this recovery. This is one mechanism, but we also know that individuals with very severe injury recover. In this case, there's very few fibers, so the plasticity will most likely take place in this individual in the spinal cord. So to ask this question, we measured the metabolic activity of the spinal cord during walking. So you see an image here before the therapy and after the therapy about the activation of the spinal cord after 10 minutes of walking. And you can see that in 90% of our participants, we see this significant decrease in the overall activation of the spinal cord, which was a bit of a surprise. You know, it suggests that the training actually will select specific neurons that become more efficient in performing the task, as opposed to activating a lot of neurons. Because it was a surprise, we modeled this in mice again. And why in mice? Because we can have the highest level of resolution with a new technology, which is single cell, single nucleus RNA sequencing. So we did that, and we compare animals that recover from the one that did not recover. And you see here 80,000 cells analyzed for their gene expression. And we developed some new machine learning algorithm that enable to prioritize which cells actually are important to explain the recovery. And what we found that is really a very specific neuronal subtype that becomes selected, become very strong to activate the spinal cord and is recruited by the stimulation. So I don't have time to go into the details, but it's a fascinating study because we really now understand the specific circuit activated by the spinal cord, receiving brain input and explaining the recovery.
So we understand more and more what's going on. You
Right.
agree? And we also saw 9 patients improving. They were all in a chronic condition. They all improved. They never became perfect, of course, as you can see. But we also know, and that's from a previous knowledge also obtained from in the rats, that if you start earlier, it's better. So you look at these rats that had an acute injury. If you start stimulating early, they recover much better. And this is something we need to know. I think it's super important to see if in the future, paraplegic patients will need this therapy very early. So for that, we are organizing currently a clinical trial in Europe with 3 different groups, one in Holland, in the Netherlands, one in Germany, and one in Switzerland. And together, we'll try to include 20 patients, acute patients, to see if the fate of this patient is going to be better with the stimulation when it's done early, compared to a group of patients that had a classic standard therapy. And we're looking forward to present this to you in a few months, let's say, maybe years.
Maybe a year. So this is all performed like under one umbrella, which is NeuroRestore. NeuroRestore is a center that Jocelyne and I are director. So this is the idea to really promote the technological innovation together with the medical expertise under the same roof. And this philosophy is captured in this little circle you have seen throughout our presentation. This is the core philosophy of NeuroRestore. The idea, and we really apply this very systematically in all our study, to go from the in-depth understanding of the scientific mechanism. We've worked in mice and in rats.
It's 11 hours.
And go all the way to therapy development, the scaling up in non-human primate model, the clinical proof of concept, and Jocelyne, being a medical doctor, it's very important that this becomes available for everyone across the world. This is why we collaborate with company.
So we would like to illustrate what just Grégoire said with one other example that you all know. The tetraplegic have hypotensive problems. So what happens when they stand up or when they sit down after having laid down a long time, they have a drop of pressure. That is really problematic.
And Dr. K, actually, who you see on this movie, could talk about it more better than any of us.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to describe
So what happens is the tilt, when you tilt them, there is a drop of pressure, and then it comes back when you put the patient back supine. So Grégoire was also fascinated by this, and again, through this theory of NeuroRestore, understanding the mechanisms, the idea was to understand what happens in this condition and what can we do precisely to improve these patients.
And this was all motivated by, various observations from Dr. K, also Susan Arkema, who showed that when you apply the stimulation at the lumbar level, you see this modulation of blood pressure. We were a bit surprised.
But you remember also when you wanted to start this, to understand these mechanisms, you start calling the Canadian team, and you asked Aaron and Jordan to join you to understand better what was going on.
Yeah, so Aaron and Jordan were working with Dr. K. So it was a natural connection. They came to Switzerland, and it became very fun to try to understand the underlying mechanism. And I remember when they first came, I was like, okay, guys, but you need to understand, there is no way that the stimulation will activate, baroreceptor or any unknown structure in the spinal cord. It activates large diameter afferent fiber. There is no other option. We knew that. And what we have been able to understand actually is that, yes, this is the spinal cord gateway, but actually the activation of glutamatergic interneuron in the spinal cord will lead to the activation of sympathetic preganglionic neurons. And eventually, of course, it leads to a vasoconstriction through the activation of sympathetic neuron in the ganglia. So that was the suggested mechanism. So we nailed it down with various experiments. We found indeed that if we stimulate epidurally and you see this increase in blood pressure, then we look in the sympathetic ganglia about the activated neuron. For example, using CFOS, which is a marker of transcriptional activity, we can see that almost all the sympathetic neurons are indeed activated strongly when you apply epidural stimulation. So it was very surprising. And then we concluded that to get the stronger pressor response, we need to stimulate where you have the highest concentration of the sympathetic preganglionic neurons. So we map them anatomically. So you put a tracer in the sympathetic ganglion that will retrograde trace the sympathetic preganglionic neurons. Then we look at the density of this neuron. And what we found is a linear relationship between the density of sympathetic preganglionic neurons and the relative increase in blood pressure, so the pressor response. And indeed, as we anticipated, the strong hotspot is not in the lumbar spinal cord, but actually in the low thoracic spinal cord, where you have a high density of these sympathetic neurons. So based on this understanding, we developed all our technology that we use for restoring walking, for modulating blood pressure, put the electrode array in the rat. Aaron had developed this really nice negative pressure chamber that are enabled to simulate an orthostatic challenge in rats. And you can see here the arterial blood pressure. Anytime you increase the pressure, you have this drop in blood pressure, and the system is not able to compensate after this complete spinal cord injury. But when we turn on the stimulation, and it's controlling closed loop, which means there's really a controller adjusting the amplitude of stimulation, we have this maintenance of a perfect blood pressure. Mm-hmm. So it works super well in rats.
And also in the monkey.
And then,
so we did exactly the same settings for the monkey, perform the lesion at the cervical level in order to, but it's an acute, of course, surgery. And then we put the electrodes again on the thoracic, low thoracic area. And we again with this vacuum chamber and these challenges, when the electrode is in and you can stimulate at different areas, at the dorsal root entry zone, especially T10, 11, 12, you see that there is really a change. So when you do the vacuum, the pressure goes down, and then you put the steam on and it goes up again. And on-off, it's very surprising to see this on-off effect.
I remember the first time you saw it in primate, you were very surprised.
And then we said, yeah, we have to do it in humans, of course. In Canada, you did the first patients, and recently we've done a second surgery, a bit different this time because we've put 2 leads in. The idea is to have the low thoracic and the lumbar spinal cord covered and to see the differences and to study different things. What is very important already at this stage, because those are the first results we had during the surgery under general anesthesia, we see that the thoracic lead is much more efficient against drops of pressure compared to the lumbar one. And if you look again at the hotspots, we could say that we had almost predicted it, but it's at the level of T11 that you have the major effect on the blood pressure.
Yeah, so it's very conservative. Across rats, monkeys.
And lumbar is less effective. There is maybe a little effect, but that is not clear at this stage. And so this was during anesthesia, and we also tried these biomimetic waves of stimulation to make sure that it's even more efficient. And that's what we saw. We were able during the surgery to increase the level of the pressure of almost 20, 30 millimeters of mercury compared to just a tonic small stimulation. So the next step will be, and has already been, the challenge when the patient is awake. And you see that tilting him, there is this drop of pressure. And when you challenge it with the stimulation, whoop, it goes up again. So that's something we are going to further study soon. And it is very important for us.
And this, as Jocelyn pointed out, illustrates the core philosophy of NeuroRestore, from in-depth understanding of the mechanism in rodent models that allow us to have a more precise approach when we develop treatment, that we test in primates, have proof of concept in human, and because it's very important for us, we want to be able to scale it up to commercialization so that everybody can use this technology in the future to treat individuals with spinal cord injury. And this is when the academic effort stops. This is when I can take my hat of Chief Scientific Officer of Onward, the company that is present in Saint Louis. You can go to the booth. This at noon there will be a
Those who
presentation.
were able to travel, at least.
Yeah, not us. Sadly, we wish we would be with you, but we were not allowed by the consulates of America. Europeans are not yet welcome in this time of pandemics. But there will be a lot of representatives from Onward at Saint Louis. We can talk to you about the technology being developed, this next generation implantable platform that can do space-time stimulation and have a lot of connectics to enable the use of the stimulation very easy in rehabilitation setting and at home for the participants. So we hope that the future is great, that we're going to provide the first tools in order to improve the neurological function on an individual with spinal cord injury. And although we are sad to not be with you, we know that we will cross you a lot in the future together with our team, a large number of individuals with expertise in engineering,
different backgrounds,
medical sciences. And we believe that this model, together with a partnership with Onward, which is unique, is a key to the development of treatment for people with spinal cord injury that has a true impact worldwide. So thank you so much also to our founders, and we wish you a great meeting.
Thank you.
I hope you were excited. It's a definitely unique new technology that actually we do have numerous clinical trials in North America. As you know, there is a UCLA, Mayo Clinic, Minneapolis, Louisville, Kentucky. In Vancouver, we're doing numerous studies with epidural and transcutaneous spinal cord stimulations. That's why numerous patients right now in North America benefited. What's amazing to see is that patients 24 hours after implantation have benefits in the motor recovery. Can you imagine patient ASIA A converted to ASIA C or ASIA D? I'm 45 years working with people with spinal cord injury. I never saw in my life so beneficial immediately effect. We still need more research in this area, but it's absolutely incredible. And particularly with autonomic recovery, what Grégoire showed our previous research when we're done with Susie Harkim in her laboratory, David Darrow in his laboratory, in my laboratory in Vancouver, with epidural stimulation or transcutaneous stimulation, what we've done with Reggie Edgerton in his laboratory. It's incredible. Orthostatic hypotension, benefits on cognitive impairment in people with spinal cord injury. I see clear. That's why first patients told us, oh my gosh, it's so big benefits when blood pressure 60/40 with standing versus 120/80 with slight zilch of stimulation to the spinal cord. I cannot answer questions to the Grégoire, but there are numerous scientists and clinicians who are actually in the audience who participate in this kind of studies. That's why talk with us, ask questions, and without any further ado, that's why please come for the luncheon and Onward. Folks will talk with us about this issue as well, and I will continue with our talks. Thank you.